Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode.
It is that fundamental belief, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that makes this country work. It's what allows us to pursue our individual dreams and yet still come together as one American family. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
Now, let me be clear. When Barack Hussein Obama made that speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2004, he wasn't campaigning for himself. He was campaigning for John Kerry, who was running against George W. Bush in 2004. Now, around this time, after hearing Obama's Democratic National Convention speech, my dad asked my mom, hey, have you heard of this Barack Obama guy? He's a senator from Illinois that just spoke at the DNC, and I think he's going to do great things. Now, I'm not going to call my dad an oracle, but I'm just going to let you know that he might have been right. Today, on Presidents Unplugged, we're diving into the life, legacy, and impact of Barack Obama. Let's do this. Now, when we talk about Barack Obama, I think it's important to start at the beginning, because his story doesn't really make any sense unless you understand how wide his perspective already was before politics even entered the picture. Obama grew up moving between Hawaii and Indonesia. He experienced completely different cultures, different religions, different ways of life, and different views that shaped how he looked at the world. Some people could see living in Indonesia for a certain time as a setback to a future American political career. But the way that Obama saw it was living without these freedoms, living without these benefits, makes you truly appreciate the freedoms that America has to offer. And it completely shaped the way and the appreciation that Obama gave our constitutional freedoms and rights throughout the rest of his political journey. Later on in his life, he attends Harvard Law School, and during this time, he meets Michelle Obama, somebody who clearly grounds him, challenges him, and supports him. And their partnership becomes one of the most defining aspects of his public life and presidency. Barack and Michelle, once they got married, learned to be able to separate themselves and do their own thing when they need to, but in the hard times, come together and encourage each other to build and fight through the greater challenges. After going to law school and getting married, Obama becomes a senator in Illinois. He originally was just a state senator, and then he went into the United States Senate. And this is where he starts building a pretty good reputation as somebody who speaks thoughtfully, somebody who listens, and somebody who believes words actually matter. But that wasn't the big thing that launched Obama's popularity. That would be that speech that I played at the beginning, the 2004 Democratic National Convention keynote address by Barack Obama. And holy mackerel, is this a great speech. Man, it was a great speech right before he ran for president, right? This was Barack Obama speaking for Barack Obama. But it wasn't. Barack Obama was not speaking at this DNC convention for him. He was speaking to promote John Kerry, the Democratic candidate in 2004. He would eventually lose, but one of the greatest things for Obama that came out of this speech was that people saw hope. People saw a man who could speak. People saw a guy who looked past partisan ideas to fight for the greater good of America. He spoke about the American story in a way that felt serious, it felt hopeful, and it felt real. And it didn't really feel forced. From that moment on, his rise to the presidency felt unreal. His campaign had an energy around it that honestly felt closer to a celebrity than just a traditional politician. The young kids loved him. There was excitement, there was hype, and there was belief that this guy was somebody who could change how leadership looked in America. When Obama eventually wins the presidency in 2008, the moment is historic. But it's also complicated because immediately, instead of focusing on the weight of the achievement, a portion of the country fixates on who he is rather than what he stands for. Questions about his birthplace, his religion, even his name, with people making embarrassing, shallow connections and comparisons between the names Obama and Osama, and pretending that Hussein, his middle name, somehow disqualified him from being American. Okay, today that sounds crazy. It sounds unrealistic, and it sounds like a meme that you'd see on Instagram that is just hating liberals. But really, it's not. Back then, these were real fears of the American people. But looking back, almost 20 years later, it's ridiculous. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. Obama could have fought those allegations and beliefs with hatred, but he didn't. He fought it with a kind of calmness that most politicians don't do. But, okay, he's been elected. What is this guy about to do? And here's where the part of the episode gets a little bit controversial. One of his biggest and most controversial goals becomes healthcare, the universal kind. Obamacare was not a small idea. It was massive reform, one that would completely change the way our nation sees the healthcare system. And it really did help millions of lower-class Americans to gain access to healthcare. But this idea also, pretty much immediately, became incredibly expensive and politically explosive. Republicans in Congress refused to cross party lines for anything, and the Affordable Care Act became one of the most divisive pieces of legislation in America. And just to give a little picture of the time, there's even a moment during a speech to a joint session of Congress when a Republican representative literally yells out that Obama is a liar in the middle of one of his speeches. Okay, that happens a lot today in modern politics, but that was a big deal back in the day. That was something that people didn't do. There was a certain amount of respect then It was starting to be lost. Calling somebody a liar? Calling the president a liar? Wow. It's completely out of line with the traditions that America had seen for centuries. Obamacare dominated multiple years of his presidency. And later, Republican administrations would attempt to repeal Obamacare entirely, which just shows you how deeply controversial this piece of legislation remained. But I'm not going to spend the entire 15 minutes talking about Obamacare. Woo, the rumors are not true. Let's talk about war. Obama was not a warmonger, and he constantly stated that he opposed the Iraq War. But that didn't mean that he didn't like to use military action. The operation to capture Osama bin Laden was one of the riskiest calls of his presidency. There was no guarantee that the information Obama had was accurate, and there was also no guarantee that this mission would succeed. The target was a heavily guarded compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a city that sat uncomfortably close to the Pakistani military academy, which only added to the risk and uncertainty of the operation. As American forces entered the compound using specifically modded, high-tech helicopters, one aircraft experienced a mechanical failure caused by a combination of the hot air, the high walls, and some mechanical issues, forcing it to crash inside the compound. At that moment, everything Obama feared almost happened. But that team, they adapted, they secured the area, and continued the mission on foot, down an entire helicopter. Osama bin Laden was identified and he was killed, and despite that helicopter crash and the enormous risk involved, not a single American life was lost, making that operation one of the most precise and successful missions of its kind. Obama approved this raid knowing that the failure of this mission could possibly lead to him not winning re-election. But its success proved his willingness to take responsibility and risks and make the hardest call when the stakes were at their highest. The mission was successful. It became a defining moment, not because of celebration, even though there was some from the Americas, but because it proved that Obama was willing to make seemingly impossible decisions under enormous pressure. Later in his presidency, he had another very tense moment with the Sandy Hook shooting, where an armed gunman at only 20 years old walked into a school and shot and killed 20 elementary schoolers and 6 adults. School shootings are extraordinarily too common today. I think we know that just from looking at the news, and I'm not a mentioner of the news very often. But the Sandy Hook shooting was one of the first times that a school shooting like this had gotten major attention. This shooting was one of the most intense and emotionally heavy moments that he had to face during his presidency. And his response, particularly a speech that he made right after the event happened, showed a president who is grieving alongside the nation, struggling with the same frustration and heartbreak as the American people. Now, this is where a recent politician is a little bit different than James Buchanan, who died 100 years ago. Recent politicians can still change their reputation. They can still alter their legacy. But I'm just going to let you know, this is the right now. This is the January of 2026 legacy of Barack Obama. by Ty Svensson. Obama had seen it all. He'd seen poverty, instability, and division in other parts of the world. And to him, America was really a blessing. Most of us Americans don't really know what the rest of the world has to offer. Obama had seen it right in front of his face. He believed deeply in that peace, and the idea that leadership meant listening just as much as speaking. His charisma was unmatched. Whether you agree with Obama or not, Obama could command a room. He could connect with people. He understood individuals, and that's a rare political skill, being able to not only understand your rich friends in Washington, but understand the people who are not as fortunate. His idea, his knowing that not all people were on that same plateau of wealth and opportunity, is where his drive came from, is where his fight came from. His effort was real. His belief in the process was real. And that's what makes Obama such an important figure to study. Not because he was perfect, not because every policy succeeded, but because he led with thoughtfulness, restraint, and a genuine belief and hope in the American people. He wasn't fighting for his story. He was fighting for America's story, America's success, and America's future. And that's what makes Barack Hussein Obama so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about presidential love. What are the sweetest and most romantic stories of ways that these presidents have found their first ladies? Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.